All right, so get this. We're diving deep into a story that feels ripped from the headlines.
Oh, yeah, this is one of those stories you almost can't make up.
Right. Like international diplomacy, but with a Trump twist.
Exactly.
Our listeners are probably already following this, but
Yeah.
just to set the scene, we're talking about Trump, Putin, and the war in Ukraine.
And we're working with some pretty interesting source material, a mix of news reports and some analysis pieces, too.
Yeah, so we're talking Washington Post, the New York Times, some other reputable outlets.
And the basic situation is wild. Trump, even though he's not in office, seems to be wading right back into the thick of things.
Trying to insert himself into this incredibly tense situation.
It really makes you wonder what impact a former president can actually have on global events like this.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
For sure. And that's what we're going to be unpacking in this deep dive.
So to kick things off, let's talk about that bombshell Washington Post report.
Oh, yeah, the one that claimed Trump urged Putin not to escalate the war in Ukraine during a phone call.
A phone call? Seriously?
That's what the report claimed.
Bold move for someone who's, not exactly in the Oval Office anymore.
No kidding. And of course, the Kremlin flat out denied it.
They did?
Oh, yeah. Their spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, called in the report pure fiction.
But didn't Peskov have a history of denying things that turned out to be true?
You're exactly right. Remember when he dismissed reports about North Korean soldiers being in Russia?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Those reports were eventually confirmed.
So maybe we should take Peskov's denials with a grain of salt.
A whole shakerful, maybe. And to make things even more intriguing, Trump's team is staying silent.
They haven't confirmed or denied the call, right?
Yep. They're playing it close to the vest. Their official statement just said they don't comment on private conversations.
So it's a classic he said situation with a whole lot of unanswered questions.
Exactly.
Like, what's the truth here?
Aha!
And why all the secrecy?
That's what we're here to figure out.
Right. And I think we need to consider something else, too.
What's...
Could this be Trump trying to position himself as some kind of key player, even though he's out of office?
It's definitely a possibility. He does love the spotlight.
And if that is what he's doing, what's his motivation here? What's he hoping to achieve?
I mean, is he genuinely trying to play peacemaker, or is there another agenda at play?
It's a real head-scratcher.
Hmm.
We need to look at his past actions to try to understand what's going on here.
You're right. His history with Russia and Ukraine is definitely relevant here.
Yeah, and history might be an understatement. Remember his approach to foreign policy during his presidency.
Oh, yeah. Particularly when it came to Russia. He often downplayed their aggression, even seemed to side with Putin over his own intelligence agencies.
The Helsinki summit in 2018 comes to mind.
Oh, man. That was a wild one.
And then there was that whole impeachment inquiry.
The one related to his dealings with Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. He was accused of withholding military aid to pressure Zelensky into investigating Biden.
Right. Trying to use his power for personal gain.
It all seemed very shady, to put it mildly.
Definitely raised some eyebrows about whose interests he was actually putting first.
And now he's potentially back in the mix, trying to exert influence on a global stage.
Yeah.
It's like he can't stay away.
It's like a moth drawn to a flame. But the bigger question is why? Is this genuine a desire to help, or is something else driving him?
Good question. And to really get into that,
Uh-huh.
I think we need to talk about his campaign promise.
You mean the one where he claimed he could end the war in Ukraine in a day?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Regardless of how realistic that promise was, it obviously appealed to people who are looking for a simple solution to this complex problem.
It really speaks to his tendency to oversimplify things and present himself as this master deal maker.
The guy who can fix anything.
Exactly.
But applying business tactics to international diplomacy, I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, Putin's not exactly the kind of guy who negotiates in good faith.
No kidding. So
Yeah.
even if Trump is being sincere, which is debatable, his approach might be completely misguided.
Totally. And that brings us to a crucial question. What impact are Trump's actions actually having? Even if we set aside the whole phone call debacle, his public statements and pronouncements could still be having an effect.
Especially with his supporters, right? They might see him as a more effective leader than the current administration.
It's possible. And that could have some pretty serious implications.
Like what?
Well, even a perceived shift in U.S. support for Ukraine could embolden Russia and further destabilize the entire region.
You're talking about giving Putin the green light to do whatever he wants.
Essentially. And it could also create a rift between the U.S. and its allies who've been working together to present a united front against Russia.
So basically, Trump could be undoing all the progress that's been made in trying to contain Russia.
It's a legitimate concern.
Right.
And speaking of reactions, we can't forget about Zelensky. He actually confirmed having a conversation with Trump, described it as an excellent call.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, it's an interesting twist. We don't know the specifics of their conversation, but Zelensky's positive spin suggests that maybe Trump's trying to position himself as a mediator.
Maybe even trying to undermine Biden's efforts in the process.
It's not impossible. We know there's no love lost between those two.
So it's like a diplomatic tug-of-war with Ukraine caught right in the middle.
A very dangerous game. And then you add in this upcoming meeting between Biden and Trump at the White House. Talk about an awkward encounter.
Seriously, can you imagine that conversation?
It's bound to be tense. Reportedly, Biden's going to try and persuade Trump to maintain his support for Ukraine, especially with those alarming reports about a potential Russian offensive.
Wait, a potential Russian offensive?
Yeah, we've got reports of Russia amassing troops near the Ukrainian border, potentially even North Korean soldiers.
North Korean soldiers.
Yeah.
This is getting more and more complicated by the minute.
It's a whole new dimension to this conflict, raises the stakes significantly.
Yeah. Okay, so hold on. We've got Trump potentially meddling in international affairs. Zelensky caught between two powerful figures, and now you're saying there's a possibility of a major escalation in the war.
That's right. Things are about to get a whole lot more interesting.
Interesting might not be the right word.
You're probably right.
This is getting really scary really fast.
No doubt about it. This situation is far more intricate than it appears on the surface. We've got all these moving parts, Trump's actions, his history with Russia and Ukraine, the reactions from key players, and now this looming threat of a Russian offensive potentially involving North Korean soldiers.
There's a lot to process.
It is. And before we get into the potential consequences of all this and what a Russian offensive might actually look like, I think we need to rewind a bit.
Yeah, good idea. Let's take a closer look at Trump's history with both Russia and Ukraine.
We need to understand how we got to this point to really grasp what might happen next.
All right, let's do it. Let's rewind the clock a bit and see how this whole mess unfolded.
Sounds good to me. So to really understand what Trump's doing now, we got to rewind a bit.
Back to the Trump presidency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His whole approach towards Russia and Ukraine has always been,
Let's just say interesting.
interesting is one way to put it.
During his time in office, he seemed to downplay Russia's aggression like it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, and remember that Helsinki summit back in 2018? He straight up sided with Putin.
Over his own intelligence agencies.
Yep, on the whole issue of Russian interference in the 2016 election.
It was pretty shocking to see a U.S. president side with a foreign adversary like that.
It was a huge moment. And then, of course, there was that whole impeachment inquiry.
Don't even get me started on that.
But it's relevant. The whole thing was about his dealings with Ukraine.
Trying to pressure Zelensky into investigating Biden?
Right, exactly. Withholding military aid to get what he wanted.
Like he was holding Ukraine hostage for his own political gain.
That's one way to look at it.
It was a mess. And it definitely raised concerns about whether Trump was putting America's interests first.
No doubt about it. It created this perception that he was way too cozy with Putin and Russia.
Which makes his current actions even more suspicious.
Exactly. Like, why is he so interested in getting involved now?
Is he trying to relive his glory days or something?
Maybe. Or maybe he's trying to prove he can still be a major player on the world stage.
But to what end? What's he hoping to achieve?
Well, remember his campaign promise about ending the war in Ukraine within a day?
Oh yeah, that was a classic Trump move. Make a bold promise with zero details on how he'd actually do it.
Right. But it worked. It appealed to people who wanted a quick and easy solution to a very complex problem.
It's like he thinks he could just swoop in and fix everything with his deal-making skills.
It's very Trumpian, but international diplomacy isn't like closing a real estate deal.
Yeah, Putin doesn't exactly play by the rules.
Putin's a whole different ballgame. He's playing a long game here.
What do you mean?
He sees this conflict as a way to reassert Russia's dominance in the region, to rebuild their sphere of influence.
So he's not going to back down easily.
Not a chance. And that's why Trump's involvement is so potentially damaging. Even if we ignore the whole phone call thing, his public statements could still have a ripple effect.
You talk about emboldening Putin, making him think he can get away with even more?
Exactly. And it could also weaken the resolve of Ukraine's allies.
The countries that have been supporting them with weapons and aid.
Right. They might start to question whether the U.S. is still fully committed to supporting Ukraine.
Which could lead to them pulling back their support.
It's a domino effect. And then there's the impact on Zelensky.
What about him?
He confirmed he talked to Trump, even called it an excellent call.
I guess he has to be diplomatic.
Of course. But I doubt he's putting too much faith in Trump's promises. He knows actions speak louder than words.
Especially after everything that happened during Trump's presidency.
Right. Zelensky needs concrete support, not just empty rhetoric.
So what's the U.S. government saying about all of this?
I don't think they're too thrilled about Trump's meddling. They've been working hard to present a united front against Russia.
And Trump's just throwing a wrench into everything.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then there's that meeting between Biden and Trump at the White House.
Talk about awkward.
It's going to be a tense one, for sure. Reportedly, Biden's hoping to convince Trump to at least maintain some level of support for Ukraine.
Fat chance of that happening.
I wouldn't hold my breath, especially with all the reports about a potential Russian offensive.
Wait, we were saying Russia might be planning a major attack?
It's looking that way. They're amassing troops near the Ukrainian border. And get this, there are reports of North Korean soldiers being involved.
North Korean soldiers?
Seriously.
That's what the intelligence suggests. They're being spotted in the Kursk region.
Isn't that the same area where Ukraine launched that surprise incursion back in August?
The very same. Makes you wonder if Putin's planning a retaliatory strike.
Trying to punish Ukraine for embarrassing him.
It's definitely a possibility. He doesn't like to be shown up.
And now with North Korea getting involved, this is taking a really dark turn.
Yeah, this adds a whole other layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. So why is North Korea even involved in this? What's in it for them?
Well, they've been cozying up to Russia lately.
Birds of a feather, I guess.
Right. They both feel isolated on the world stage. They both have a bone to pick with the U.S.
So they're teaming up to cause trouble.
You could say that. And their alliance could have serious consequences.
Like what?
Well, it could lead to an expansion of the conflict, blur the lines between regional and global powers.
And who knows what North Korea might bring to the table. They're pretty unpredictable.
Exactly. And that's what makes this situation so dangerous. There are so many unknowns, so many potential triggers for a wider conflict.
Okay, I need to take a deep breath. This is a lot to absorb.
I hear you. We've gone from a potential phone call to a potential full-scale war in the span of like 20 minutes.
It's all happening so fast, and it's hard to see how any of this ends well.
I know. But before we spiral into despair, I think we should unpack this potential Russian offensive a little more.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
Let's try to understand what we're actually dealing with here.
All right, so based on the reports we've seen, it looks like Russia is planning a major push into Ukrainian territory.
All right, so this Biden-Trump meeting, it's hard to imagine these two agreeing on anything.
I know, right? Their approaches to foreign policy are like night and day.
Biden's all about working with allies, presenting a united front.
Right, the whole multilateralism thing. And then you have Trump, who's more like America first all the time.
Questioning the value of NATO cozying up to dictators.
It's a completely different worldview.
So realistically, do you think Biden can actually convince Trump to support a more unified approach to Russia?
Honestly, I wouldn't bet on it.
Why not?
Well, look at Trump's track record. He's always put his own interests first.
His ego, his political calculation.
Exactly. He might see this meeting as a chance to undermine Biden to score points with his base.
Even if it means hurting Ukraine in the process.
I wouldn't put it past him.
Man, that's depressing. But is there any chance that Trump's involvement could actually have a positive impact?
That's an interesting question.
Like maybe he could use his relationship with Putin to de-escalate things.
I mean, it's not totally impossible.
Right. He's one of the few people who can actually talk to Putin directly.
And sometimes back-channel diplomacy can be effective. It can open up lines of communication that wouldn't exist otherwise.
So maybe Trump could be a go-between? Sort of a rogue diplomat?
Maybe. But we have to remember that Putin is a master manipulator. He's not going to do anything unless it benefits him.
So even if Trump is trying to help, he could easily be played by Putin.
Exactly. It's a dangerous game. And we don't know what Trump's true motives are. He might be more interested in making himself look good than actually helping Ukraine.
This is giving me a serious headache.
I feel you. This whole situation is so unpredictable. It's like we're watching a train wreck in slow motion.
And there's nothing we can do to stop it.
Pretty much. The stakes are incredibly high. And it's not just about geopolitics or global power struggles.
Right at the end of the day, this is about real people's lives.
The Ukrainian people are the ones suffering the most in all of this.
They're caught in the middle of this power struggle between Russia, the U.S., and now Trump, too.
And it's impossible to know how it's all going to end.
So I guess the big question is, can a former president, even one as controversial as Trump, really influence global events like this?
I think the answer is yes, but in a very complicated way.
What do you mean?
Well, Trump may not have official power anymore, but he still has a lot of influence, especially with his supporters.
And he knows how to use the media to get attention.
He's a master of manipulating the narrative.
So even if he's not calling the shots directly, he can still shape the conversation.
And in a situation as volatile as this one, that can have a real impact.
So we're all just along for the ride.
Pretty much buckle up because it's going to be a bumpy one.
Well, folks, It looks like we've reached the end of another deep dive.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We started with that alleged phone call between Trump and Putin,
Then we explored Trump's history with Russia and Ukraine,
analyzed the potential fallout from his actions.
and grappled with the possibility of a major Russian offensive.
It's been a wild ride,
To say the least.
and we've uncovered some pretty disturbing information along the way.
But as always, we encourage you to keep digging deeper, to seek out different perspectives, and to form your own conclusions.
Because that's what it means to be an informed citizen in today's world.
Right, we can't just passively consume information. We have to actively engage with it.
Challenge our assumptions. Think critically.
And most importantly, never stop asking questions.
Because the truth is out there somewhere.
It just might take a little digging to find it.
Well said. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deeper.